Globalization and Community Media. Hello everyone. Welcome to the lecture on Globalization and Community Media. This lecture is a part of your paper on media and globalization. In this lecture, we will learn about the origin and evolution of community media, with a specific focus on community radio in the context of globalization of media. This understanding will help us to differentiate between public service media, commercial media, and community media. Introduction. Community media differs from the other forms of media on the scope of ownership, access, and participation and objectives of the media. These features also make community media a twofold democratization and development for social change. However, with the community media being present around the world for more than 50 years now, it is also important to scrutinize these grandiose claims and assess whether community media have been really participatory as envisioned, or have they fallen to the same top-down approach of development. Globalization and need for community media. Mass media has really expanded in the last 100 years, and the platforms of radio, television, print and online have become ubiquitous in public life. However, the expansion of mass media has also led to somewhat hegemony of particular cultures, and in particular, broadcast programs from a few countries has dominated the content in a globalized media. Powerful commercial media are ruling the content globally. By definition, global media have to be commercial in nature and thus depend on ad revenues. This also implies that the global media content is largely entertainment based, as these kind of programs are easier to sell in the market. Another reason for the global media to be entertainment-centric is that the government in various countries where the global media broadcasts are rather happy in allowing entertainment-based soft contents than contents of hard news. For example, thus the two key features of global commercial media is that they are focusing largely on entertainment, and that the content of few countries dominate the broadcast, leading in certain cultural hegemony. Against the backdrop of dominant global media, there exists another category of broadcast media known as the public service broadcast media. Public service broadcasting is usually supported by state or is funded by state. It is generally established as a legal entity and is run by a statutory council. Examples of such broadcasting can be British Broadcasting Corporation and the Doordarshan run by Prasar Bharati. The broad objective of public service broadcast is not making profit as the objective of commercial media, but to provide information and entertainment to the general public. Despite providing vital information and entertainment to the public, neither the public service broadcast media nor the commercial media have been found sufficient to address the voices at the very local or community level, or to represent the issues and concerns of the marginalized sections of society. Community media, including community television and community radio, rose to bridge this gap and become the voice of the voiceless. Within the community media, there are few examples of community television from Latin America, but it is the community radio that has gained popularity worldwide and evolved around the globe. Evolution of community media. The origins of community media, like the community radio, can be traced to Latin America. However, ever since, the forms and scope of community radio have considerably evolved. It was in Bolivia in 1947 that miners' radio was established. The first radio service from the Singlo XS mine was called Voice of the Miners. Subsequently, 23 radio stations were set up in various mining areas, and these radio stations collectively came to be known as the miners' radio. This was a platform for all the workers and miners to air their views and raise their voice against the oppressive working conditions and atrocities imposed by the wealthy mine owners. O'Connor, 2004. These were also the years when in many parts of Latin America, a struggle between Marxism and capitalism was in progress. Miners' radio was branded as a mere trade union radio. However, its organic conception and the situation in the larger context of power makes the initiative closest to the community radios, principles of participation and giving voice to the voiceless. The miners' radio helped the workers counter the negative propaganda against them that was regularly beamed on the mainstream media. It provided important information and news related to the workers and helped them unite. The stations were regularly targeted by those in power and many a times were destroyed and vandalized. Fraser and Rastropade Estrada, 2005. Another such community radio station initiative in Latin America was Radio Suta Tenzen, Colombia, which became a voice for the peasant community and received as many as 50,000 letters every year from the peasants. In the 60s and the 70s, community radio gained roots in Europe, born out of entrepreneurship and a desire to loosen the stranglehold of public service media on the broadcast scenario. Comoritz, 2009. Such stations were labeled as the pirate stations, as they tried to wean away as much listenership from the mainstream media as possibly could. The impact of such stations was that many European countries started thinking of putting together a legal framework to sanction such stations. In Africa, community radio movement gained momentum after the end of apartheid era in South Africa. The main concern in Africa was centered on democratization and lending voice to the marginalized. Kenya was one of the first countries in Africa to start community radio stations. In 1982, a station was established in the Homa Bay community on Lake Victoria with the help of UNESCO. In Asia too, the community radio movement was led by UNESCO as a community radio station became functional in Sri Lanka. Powerland Malik, 2007. Features and functions of community media. One phrase that best describes community media, like community radio station, that it is a station of the people, by the people and for the people. Community radio station looks inward into the community it is representative of and strives to air the issues and concerns of the community. An important aspect of the community media is that it is owned by the community, run and managed by the community, and the content that it generates is selected and produced by the community. The aim is to make the community radio station truly accessible and participatory in nature. Another aspect is that it gives voice to the marginalized section of society. Let's look at some of the important features of community media. Point number 1, access and participation. Access means that everyone in the community has access to the broadcast of the station. Participation implies that the community has active role and participation in producing content as well as participation in planning and management of the community media like a community radio station. Point number 2, audience as the central actors. The community, which constitutes the audience, is the central piece as all the programming is centered on the needs and requirements of that community. Point number 3, ownership. In a sense, it is the community that owns the radio station. And this is the very spirit of community radio. However, many a times it is a non-profit organization, NGO, etc. that may formally own the community radio station. But this ownership also is on behalf of the community. Point number 4, management. Community should have their say in the day-to-day running and management of the radio station. In case of another body like NGO, having the formal ownership of the station, the community should have ideally 50% and above representation in the board of directors. Point number 5, funding. As a community radio station is run by a non-for-profit body, it relies on a number of funding sources like donation, membership fees, advertising, grants, sponsorships, money collected through events, etc. Usually a mix of all the above works well to maintain the community-centric approach of any station. The eventual aim is to become financially independent and sustainable, as that goes a long way in achieving editorial independence of the station. Point number 6, independence in editorial and programming decisions. It is the larger community that decides what kind of programs or programs on what issues should be broadcast, keeping in mind the needs of the community. The station should be free of influence from political parties, local bodies, pressure groups, religious institutions, etc. Point number 7, voice for the marginalized and inclusion of various groups in the community. Community radio is a step towards democratization of media. Thus, it is very important that the marginalized groups should be adequately represented in the management as well as the content of the radio station. Issues relevant to women, minority communities, young and old people, economically weaker sections within the community should be properly addressed. Only a community radio station can claim to be a voice of the voiceless. Having looked at some of the features of community media, let us move on to learn about its function. Here are a few key functions. Promote development and social change. Promote diversity of voices and content. Encourage participation of the community in programming and eventually in the process of development. Promote democratization of media. Promote local languages and culture. Encourage participation of civil society. Challenge voice poverty, giving voice to the voiceless. Promote marginalized community to air their voice. Promote dialogue between various stakeholders in society. Kinds of programming in community media. The programming policies of a community radio station needs to be fine-tuned itself towards certain aspects. Programs should be participatory. Community radio looks at the involving of the community in producing programs that is relevant to the community. The first level of participation involves listening to the community to ascertain the needs and the requirements specific to the community. This is a continuous process, as the needs and requirements of a community may also change or evolve. This step ensures that the community radio station understands the kind of programs needed to be produced. The second level of participation is at the stage of producing content for the community radio station. Another important step towards participation is involving community members and groups as programs, hosts, and broadcasters. It is also important to include community members as part of discussions or interviews. This lends more credibility to the programs and also ensures that the community is able to present their ideas and opinions. Another key step in participation is at the stage of evaluation of any given program. The feedback from community helps in assessing the effectiveness of any program. Other than feedback that community radio station receives through letters, etc., it is also crucial to incorporate regular evaluation of the programs with the help of audiences' participation. News about the community while the larger broadcast stations concentrate on global news or news from big domestic cities, community radio station has the edge to report on community news. Coverage of local and community news strikes a chord among the members of the community and goes a long way in establishing the station's credibility. It is best to take help of the community and have local reporters from the community scattered in the community who will be able to report local news. However, it is crucial to follow the ethics of journalism, even when it may be local reporter filing for community radio station. The news and views should be balanced and not carry slant towards any individual or group. Programs catering to health and education issues relating to health and education invariably features among the needs and requirements of community. So it is crucial that a lot of on-air time or broadcast time is spent on programs catering to these two areas. It becomes important for the community radio station to have access to specialists in the health and educational sectors who find time to address such issues in the community with the help of radio broadcasts. Let us take the example of community radio in India. Commenting on the broadcast scenario in India, the Chanda Committee recommended decentralization of broadcast so that to encourage public participation. In 1995, the Supreme Court of India passed a judgment calling the airwaves as public property. This led to loosening of All India Radio's stranglehold on radio broadcast in India. Initially, a number of licenses of FM commercial radio stations were allotted. While the commercial stations slowly began to gain popularity among the public, a number of bodies and pressure groups in India started to call for establishing community radio stations in India to cater to the demands of community-specific programs. In 1996, a number of educational institutes, social activists, development communicators, broadcasters met in Bangalore to request the government to legitimize community radio station in India. This finally led to government to allocate license for community radio broadcasts. Initially, educational and agricultural institutes were allowed to run such stations. Subsequently, local non-for-profit bodies were allowed such licenses. Eventually, community radio in India has caught up in a big way in the last 4 years, and the Indian government has granted license to 176 community radio stations by 2015, and many more are in process. Powerland Malik writes that community radio became a platform that fulfills the need of those groups that have negligible access to the mass media. While in developing countries, community radio became one of the best ways to reach excluded or marginalized communities in targeted, useful ways and became one of the best in giving them voice. In India, to begin with, only educational campus radio stations were allowed under somewhat stringent conditions. But various NGOs and social groups were leading the campaign to allow for community radio stations in India, and some individual efforts also didn't go unnoticed. In 2006, BBC did a story on one Raghav Mahato in Bihar who ran a radio station with homemade $1 kit without any legal permission. The station was forced to shut down, but it made headlines as amazing do-it-yourself village FM radio station. Government of India opened up FM radio to community groups and allowed 17 universities to set up campus radio. In 2006, new policy community radio was announced that opened up FM radio licensing to civil societies, voluntary organizations, registered societies, autonomous bodies, and public trusts. By October 2015, there were 176 community radio stations operational in India. As the community radio spends a strong decade, call for assessing its participatory and democratizing nature has grown stronger. This is also the time to understand and assess the degree of participation brought about by these media. This is because participation is considered to be the cornerstone of democracy and development. And community media, including community radio stations, have been propounded to bring around citizen participation. However, it is not easy to assess participation, as participation is a very complex process, and even researchers have grappled with the debate of theorizing, researching, and analyzing participation. Participatory examples have arisen when the media has organically evolved from among the community without much support from outside agencies. Among the very first examples of community radio, the miners' radio in Bolivia was closer to the political definition of participation as portrayed by Carpentier. The same can be said of the example of Raghav Mahato in Bihar. Thus, it is important to assess whether the community radio station is employing top-down or a bottom-to-top approach. Conclusion. In this lecture, we learned the specific features and nature of community media, like community radio station, and understood their place, importance, and relevance in the era of media globalization. We also understood the history and evolution of community media and what makes it different from other forms of media. We also got introduced to the community radio scenario in India and its importance. Further, we developed a critique towards the practice of community media and looked to evaluate its performance in the fields of access and participation. We learnt that the community media differs from commercial and public service media, as it keeps the community or the audience as the center character. This kind of media is not driven by profit motive, but it aims to provide voice to the marginalized sections of the society. We also learnt that ownership of community media rests within the hands of the community, even if not-for-profit body may have the legal ownership. Finally, we imbibed that communities' participation in management, production, and evaluation of programs is a critical feature of community media. Thank you.